The padlock hung heavy and cold in the bitter November wind, mocking Penelope Dawson as she stood shivering on the narrow porch of the modest frame house that had been her home for 23 years. Her fingers, already numb from the cold, fumbled uselessly with the thick iron lock that her cousin Bernard had fastened to the door just hours before, while she had been at the general store purchasing flour and sugar with the last of her carefully saved money. The year was 1875, and Fort Kearny, Nebraska, was settling into the harsh grip of an early winter, the kind that turned the prairie into an unforgiving wasteland of frozen grass and biting wind. Penelope pressed her forehead against the rough wood of the door, fighting back tears that would only freeze on her cheeks. Inside that house were all her belongings, meager though they were, and more importantly, the deed to the property that her father had left her when he died of fever 3 years ago. Her mother had passed when Penelope was just a child, leaving her father to raise her alone in this frontier town. He had been a good man, a clerk at the fort who saved every penny to buy this small house and the quarter-acre it sat on. It was not much, but it was hers by right, and Bernard knew it. Bernard Dawson was her father's nephew, a weasel of a man with thin lips and calculating eyes who had shown up on her doorstep 6 months ago claiming to be down on his luck. Penelope, kind-hearted and alone, had taken him in, given him meals and a place to sleep in the small shed behind the house. She should have known better. Bernard had been going through her father's papers, searching for anything of value, and when he found the deed, he began his campaign to convince her that as the only male relative, the property should rightfully pass to him. When Penelope refused, citing the clear language in her father's will, Bernard had grown cruel. This morning's confrontation had been the worst yet. Bernard had demanded she sign over the property, shouting that a woman had no business owning land, that she should be married off and settled somewhere as a man's wife, not playing at being independent. When Penelope stood her ground, refusing to even discuss the matter further, Bernard had stormed out. She thought he had finally given up and left town. Instead, he had waited for her to leave the house, then returned with that cursed padlock and sealed her out of her own home. The sun was already beginning its descent toward the western horizon, and the temperature was dropping fast. Penelope pulled her thin wool shawl tighter around her shoulders, knowing it would not be enough once darkness fell. Fort Kearny was not the bustling military post it had been during the wagon train days. The fort itself had been abandoned by the Army just 2 years prior, and the small civilian settlement that remained was sparse and struggling. Most of her neighbors kept to themselves, and the few she might have turned to for help lived too far away to reach before nightfall in this cold. She tried the lock again, pulling and twisting, but Bernard had chosen well. It was a new lock, strong and unyielding. Penelope felt panic beginning to claw at her chest. She could not stay outside all night. The temperature would likely drop below freezing, and she had no coat heavy enough to survive such exposure. The nearest neighbor was Mrs. Henderson, a widow who lived half a mile down the road, but Mrs. Henderson was elderly and fearful, and would never open her door after dark. Penelope was about to step off the porch, thinking she might try to break a window to get inside, when she heard the distinctive sound of horse hooves on the frozen ground. She turned to see a rider approaching along the dirt road, sitting tall in the saddle despite the cold. As he drew closer, she recognized him as one of the cowboys from the Valentine ranch, which lay about 5 miles west of town. She had seen him in town a few times over the past year, usually at the general store or the blacksmith, but had never spoken to him directly. The cowboy reined in his horse at the edge of her property, his eyes taking in the scene. He was a tall man, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His face was weathered from years in the sun and wind, but there was a kindness in his brown eyes that Penelope noticed immediately. He wore a heavy canvas coat lined with sheepskin, and his leather gloves looked warm and well-made. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I do not mean to intrude, but are you having trouble with your door?" Penelope felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment despite the cold. "I am locked out," she admitted, hating how helpless she sounded. "My cousin has put this padlock on while I was away and I cannot get inside." The cowboy's expression darkened. "He locked you out of your own home." "It is my home," Penelope said firmly. "My father left it to me. Bernard is just a distant relative who has been staying here, and he is angry that I will not sign the property over to him." The cowboy dismounted in one smooth motion, looping his horse's reins over the porch railing. Up close, Penelope could see that he had a strong jaw and a serious demeanor, but there was something gentle in the way he moved, careful not to startle her. "That is not right," he said simply. "A man has no business locking a woman out in this cold, relative or not. May I take a look at the lock?" Penelope nodded, stepping aside to give him access to the door. He pulled off one glove and examined the padlock carefully, testing its weight and the way it was fastened through the hasp. "It is a good lock," he said after a moment. "Strong. But the hasp it is attached to is only held by 4 screws. He glanced at her. "If you will allow me, I can remove the screws and take the whole assembly off. The door will need a new hasp later, but you will be able to get inside and out of this cold." "I would be so grateful," Penelope said, relief flooding through her. "I have been standing here trying to figure out what to do, and I was becoming frightened. The sun will set soon, and I have no place else to go." "You should not have to go anywhere else," the cowboy said, a note of anger in his voice that was clearly not directed at her. "This is your home." He went to his horse and pulled a small leather tool roll from his saddlebag. "My name is Yates Valentine, by the way. I work at my family's ranch west of here." "I am Penelope Dawson," she replied. "I have seen you in town before, I think." "I have seen you too," Yates said, and there was something in his tone that made Penelope look at him more closely. He knelt by the door, selecting a sturdy screwdriver from his tool roll. "You always seemed to be in a hurry, focused on whatever task you had. I noticed that you carried yourself with purpose." Penelope watched as he began working on the screws that held the hasp to the doorframe. His hands were steady and sure, despite the cold. "I have had to be purposeful," she said quietly. "There is no one else to manage things for me, and I will not sit idle while the world moves around me." "That is admirable," Yates said. The first screw came free and he started on the second. "Too many people just drift through life, letting things happen to them instead of taking hold of their own fate. My father always said that a person's character shows in how they handle hardship." "Your father sounds like a wise man," Penelope said. "He was," Yates replied. "He passed last spring. My brother and I run the ranch now with our mother. It is hard work, but it is ours, and we are proud of it." The second screw came free. "I understand what it means to want to hold onto what your family built. You are right to stand your ground against your cousin." The third screw proved more difficult, rusted slightly in place. Yates worked at it patiently, and Penelope found herself studying him more closely. He had a strong profile, and there was something reassuring about his presence, something solid and dependable. She realized that she felt safer just having him there, that the panic that had been building in her chest had eased considerably. "Where is your cousin now?" Yates asked as he worked. "I do not know," Penelope admitted. "He locked me out and left. I assume he has gone to the saloon or perhaps to stay with someone else in town who might be sympathetic to his cause." Does he have many sympathizers? The third screw came free. Some of the older men in town think as he does, that women should not own property, Penelope said bitterly. They believe I should either marry or turn everything over to the nearest male relative. But the law is on my side. My father's will was properly witnessed and filed. Bernard has no legal claim. Then he is not just cruel but foolish as well, Yates said. He started on the fourth and final screw. Trying to force you out will only land him in trouble if you choose to involve the law. The law here is limited, Penelope said. The sheriff is sympathetic to me, but he is just one man, and he has told me that property disputes between family members are difficult to resolve. He suggested I find a lawyer, but the nearest lawyer is in Kearney Junction, 30 miles east, and I cannot afford his fees. The final screw came free, and Yates carefully removed the entire hasp assembly, padlock and all. He stood and handed the mechanism to Penelope. There, he said. The lock is off, and more importantly, you now have the whole thing. Your cousin cannot just put it back on without replacing the hasp, which will give you time to make other arrangements. Penelope took the heavy metal assembly, feeling the weight of the padlock in her hands. Thank you, she said, and her voice caught slightly. Thank you so much. I was so frightened, and you have been so kind to help me. Yates looked at her, and she saw real concern in his eyes. Will you be safe here tonight? Is there a chance your cousin will return and cause more trouble? Penelope considered this. I do not know, she said honestly. Bernard can be unpredictable when he has been drinking, and he usually drinks when he is angry. Then I would like to make sure you are secure before I leave, Yates said. May I check the other entrances to your house? Make sure there is no way he could get in without you knowing. Penelope hesitated for only a moment. This was improper, inviting a man she barely knew into her home, but these were unusual circumstances, and she trusted her instincts about Yates Valentine. There was nothing predatory in his manner, only genuine concern. Yes, please, she said. That would ease my mind considerably. She pushed open the door, which swung freely now that the lock was removed, and stepped into the cold interior of the house. It was not much warmer inside than out, as the fire in the small stove had long since died. Yates followed her in, removing his hat respectfully. Penelope quickly lit an oil lamp, and warm light filled the single main room. The house was simple but neat. One large room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room, with a small bedroom partitioned off at the back. The furniture was plain but well cared for, and Penelope had done her best to make the space comfortable with a few homemade cushions and curtains. A braided rug covered the center of the wooden floor, and her father's few books sat on a small shelf by the window. Yates methodically checked the 2 windows in the main room, testing their latches. These are secure, he said, but the glass is thin. If someone wanted to break in, it would not be difficult. I know, Penelope said quietly, but there is nothing I can do about that. I cannot afford better windows. They moved to the bedroom, which contained only a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a wash basin. The single window here was equally vulnerable. The door in the back, Yates asked. Just to the shed where Bernard was staying, Penelope said. And there is a small root cellar entrance outside. They went through the back door into the tiny yard. The shed was a ramshackle structure barely big enough for a cot and a few belongings. The root cellar was accessed by an angled wooden door set into the ground. Yates checked both. The shed has no lock, and the cellar door is just held with a latch. If your cousin is determined, he could hide in either place and wait for you. Penelope shuddered, pulling her shawl tighter. What should I do? Yates thought for a moment. Do you have a hammer and nails? Yes, in the shed. Let me secure the shed door from the outside so it cannot be opened. As for the cellar, is there a way to bolt it from inside the house? There is a bolt on the inside door that leads down to it from the kitchen, Penelope said. Make sure that stays bolted. And tonight, push your chest of drawers in front of your bedroom door. It will not stop someone determined, but it will make noise if they try to come in, and that will wake you. He paused. Do you have any weapon? A gun? Penelope shook her head. My father had a rifle, but Bernard took it weeks ago, claiming he needed it for hunting. He never returned it. Yates's jaw tightened. That was theft, plain and simple. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small revolver, a nickel-plated piece that gleamed in the lamplight. I want you to keep this tonight. Do you know how to use a gun? My father taught me the basics, Penelope said, staring at the weapon, but I have never had to use one for real. Hopefully you will not have to tonight either, Yates said, but I will feel better knowing you have protection. The gun is loaded with 5 rounds. Keep it near your bed. If someone tries to break in, do not hesitate to defend yourself. Penelope took the gun, feeling its weight in her hand. I cannot take your only weapon, she protested. I have another at my saddle, Yates said, and I know how to handle myself. You need this more than I do right now. He showed her quickly how to check if it was loaded, how to aim, and how to pull back the hammer before firing. His hands guided hers gently, his touch warm even through the cold. When he was satisfied that she understood, Yates went to secure the shed door. Penelope heard the sound of hammering as he nailed it shut from the outside. When he returned to the main house, she had managed to get the fire going in the stove, and the room was beginning to warm slightly. I should get going, Yates said. It will be full dark soon, and I still have a ride ahead of me. But I want you to know that if you need help, the Valentine Ranch is about 5 miles west on the main road. Anyone in town can give you exact directions. My brother's name is Yardley, and my mother is Sarah. Any one of us would be happy to help you if you need it. You have already helped me more than I can repay, Penelope said. I do not even know how to thank you properly. No thanks needed, Yates said, settling his hat back on his head. Just stay safe tonight. And tomorrow, if you feel comfortable doing so, come by the ranch. My mother is a strong woman who has dealt with her share of difficult men. She might have advice on how to handle your cousin legally. She also knows everyone in the county, including the circuit judge who comes through once a month. I would like that, Penelope said, though I hesitate to impose further on your kindness. It is no imposition, Yates said, and there was something in his eyes that made Penelope's heart skip slightly. I would very much like to see you again, Miss Dawson, under better circumstances than these. Penelope felt warmth rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. I would like that as well, Mr. Valentine. He smiled then, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his serious face into something altogether more appealing. Yates, please. We have been through a crisis together. I think that earns us the right to use first names. Then you must call me Penelope. Penelope, he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his deep voice. I will be in town day after tomorrow for supplies. If you have not come to the ranch by then, I will stop by to check on you if that would be acceptable. More than acceptable, Penelope said. I would appreciate it. Yates nodded and moved toward the door. He paused there, looking back at her. Keep that gun close and do not open the door to anyone tonight, not even if they claim to be friendly. Better to be cautious. I will, Penelope promised. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in her shawl, watching as Yates mounted his horse and rode off into the gathering darkness. The warmth she felt had nothing to do with the fire now burning in her stove. For the first time in months, since Bernard had arrived and began making her life miserable, she felt something like hope. That night, Penelope did exactly as Yates had instructed. She bolted the cellar door, pushed her chest of drawers in front of her bedroom door, and kept the revolver on her bedside table. She lay awake for a long time, listening to every creak and groan of the house settling, every whistle of wind through the eaves. But no one came. Bernard did not return, and by morning Penelope felt confident enough to venture out. She spent the morning doing her usual chores, feeding the chickens she kept in a small coop behind the house, drawing water from the well, and tidying the main room. All the while, her mind kept returning to Yates Valentine. She had never paid much attention to men, too focused on survival and keeping her small household running. Her father's illness and death had consumed her for months, and then there had been the struggle to establish herself as the rightful owner of the property. Romance had seemed like a luxury she could not afford, but something about Yates had stirred feelings she had not expected. It was not just his obvious physical strength or his competence, though both were attractive qualities. It was the way he had treated her with respect, had listened to her concerns without dismissing them, had taken action to help her without expecting anything in return. In a world where most men seemed to think women were incapable of managing their own affairs, Yates had simply accepted her right to her property and set about helping her protect it. By noon, Penelope had made up her mind. She would take Yates up on his offer to visit the ranch and speak with his mother. It was possible that Mrs. Valentine would know of some legal avenue she had not considered, some way to permanently bar Bernard from harassing her. More than that, though, Penelope wanted to see Yates again. She wanted to thank him properly, and she wanted to explore these new feelings that had taken root in her heart. She changed into her best dress, a simple blue calico that her father had bought her 2 Christmases ago. It was nothing fancy, but it was clean and well-fitted, and it brought out the color of her eyes. She pinned up her dark blonde hair, allowing a few loose curls to frame her face, and put on her only coat, a brown wool garment that was serviceable if not particularly warm. She left a note on the table, in case anyone came looking for her, saying simply that she had gone visiting and would return by evening. The walk to the Valentine Ranch took her nearly 2 hours. The road was frozen hard, which made for easier walking than mud would have been, but the wind was bitter and unrelenting. Penelope was thoroughly chilled by the time she spotted the ranch buildings in the distance. The Valentine Ranch was more substantial than she had expected. The main house was a large 2-story structure built of wood with a wide front porch. There were several outbuildings, including a large barn, a bunkhouse, and what looked like a stable and equipment shed. A split-rail fence enclosed several corrals, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance on the prairie grass. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, a welcoming sign on such a cold day. Penelope approached the main house nervously, suddenly uncertain of her decision to come. What if Yates had only been being polite? What if his mother did not welcome an uninvited stranger? But before she could turn back, the front door opened and a woman stepped out onto the porch. Sarah Valentine was a handsome woman in her early 50s, with silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp, intelligent eyes. She wore a practical dress with an apron over it, and there was an air of capability about her that immediately put Penelope at ease. "You must be Penelope Dawson," Mrs. Valentine said warmly. "Yates told us about your trouble yesterday evening. Please, come inside where it is warm. You must be frozen from that walk." Penelope climbed the porch steps gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Valentine. I hope I am not intruding." "Your son was kind enough to suggest I might come speak with you." "No intrusion at all," Mrs. Valentine said firmly, ushering Penelope inside. "Any woman being harassed by a male relative is welcome in this house. I have little patience for men who think they can bully women into submission." The interior of the house was warm and welcoming, with a large stone fireplace in the main room and comfortable furniture arranged for both work and relaxation. A large kitchen area took up one end of the room, and Penelope could smell something delicious cooking. "Sit down by the fire, Mrs. Valentine instructed. "I will get you some hot coffee and something to eat. You look half frozen." Penelope was about to protest that she did not need anything, but her empty stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, and she realized she had been too nervous to eat breakfast. "Thank you," she said simply, settling into a chair near the fire. Mrs. Valentine moved efficiently around the kitchen, pouring coffee and cutting thick slices of bread that she spread with butter and jam. She brought the food to Penelope along with the coffee, then sat down in the chair opposite. "Now," she said, "tell me everything about this cousin of yours and his claim on your property." Penelope found herself pouring out the whole story, starting with her father's death and Bernard's arrival months later. Mrs. Valentine listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly stern as Penelope described Bernard's escalating harassment and finally the incident with the padlock. "This is outrageous," Mrs. Valentine said when Penelope finished, "and unfortunately, all too common. Men like your cousin think that their sex alone entitles them to property and power, regardless of what the law says. But your father's will is legal, you said." "Yes. It was witnessed by 2 men from the fort and filed with the county clerk before my father died. He wanted to make sure there would be no question about my inheritance." "Smart man," Mrs. Valentine said approvingly. "Then your cousin has no legal leg to stand on. The problem is enforcing your rights without spending money you do not have on lawyers and court proceedings." "Exactly," Penelope said. "The sheriff has been sympathetic, but he says there is little he can do unless Bernard actually commits a crime that I can prove." "Locking you out of your own house is a crime," Mrs. Valentine said. "At the very least, it is trespassing and theft of your property access. But I understand your hesitation to push things to that level. Family disputes can get ugly, especially in a small community like this." The front door opened, bringing a blast of cold air with it. Penelope looked up to see Yates entering, stamping his boots free of frost. His face lit up when he saw her, and Penelope felt her heart do a little jump. "Penelope," he said warmly, "I am glad you came. No trouble last night, I hope." "None," Penelope said. "Bernard did not return. Your precautions and your gun made me feel much safer." She had returned the revolver to its place by her bedside, planning to give it back to him when she saw him again. Yates pulled off his gloves and coat, hanging them on pegs by the door. "That is good, but we need to find a more permanent solution. You should not have to live in fear in your own home." "Your mother and I were just discussing that," Penelope said. Another man entered behind Yates, and Penelope recognized him as Yates's brother, though they looked quite different. Where Yates was tall and dark-haired with a serious demeanor, Yardley Valentine was slightly shorter with lighter brown hair and a more easygoing manner. He was perhaps a year or 2 older than Yates, somewhere in his late 20s. "So this is the famous Penelope," Yardley said with a grin. "Yates has not stopped talking about you since he got home last night." "Yardley," Yates said in a warning tone, but his ears had gone slightly red. Penelope found herself smiling despite her embarrassment. "It is nice to meet you, Mr. Valentine." "Just Yardley, please," he said. "We do not stand on formality much around here. And I am glad Yates was able to help you yesterday. That cousin of yours sounds like a real piece of work." "He is," Penelope agreed. "I just wish I knew how to make him leave permanently without causing a scene that would reflect badly on my father's memory." Mrs. Valentine stood up decisively. "I have an idea," she said. The circuit judge, Judge Henderson, is actually my cousin. He is due to come through Fort Kearny next week for the regular court session. I can write to him and explain your situation. If he agrees, he might be willing to issue an order barring your cousin Bernard from your property and confirming your ownership. That would give you legal backing if Bernard tries anything else. That would be wonderful, Penelope said, feeling hope bloom in her chest. But would the judge really do that? He does not know me. He knows me, and he trusts my judgment, Mrs. Valentine said. More than that, he is a fair man who believes in upholding the law, and the law in this case is clearly on your side. I will write the letter this afternoon and have one of the boys take it to the post tomorrow. I do not know how to thank you, Penelope said, feeling tears prick at her eyes. You have all been so kind to me, and you barely know me. We know enough, Mrs. Valentine said firmly. We know you are a young woman trying to honor her father's wishes and maintain her independence in difficult circumstances. That is enough for me. For all of us, Yates added, and when Penelope looked at him, she saw such warmth and admiration in his eyes that she had to look away, feeling suddenly shy. Mrs. Valentine seemed to sense the change in the atmosphere. Penelope, why do you not plan to stay for supper? It is a long, cold walk back to town, and it would be foolish to make it in the dark. We have a spare room, and you would be welcome to stay the night and return home tomorrow morning. One of the boys can drive you in the wagon so you do not have to walk. Penelope hesitated. It was highly improper for an unmarried woman to stay overnight at a ranch with two unmarried men present, even with their mother there as chaperone. But Mrs. Valentine's offer was practical, and Penelope found herself wanting very much to accept. If it would not be too much trouble, she said slowly. No trouble at all, Mrs. Valentine said. In fact, I would enjoy the female company. It gets tiresome being the only woman in a house full of men. Come, I will show you where you can freshen up before supper. The evening that followed was one of the most pleasant Penelope could remember in a long time. Mrs. Valentine was an excellent cook, and the meal of roast beef, potatoes, and vegetables was delicious. The conversation around the table was warm and easy, with Yardley entertaining them with stories of ranch mishaps, and Mrs. Valentine sharing memories of the early days of the ranch when her husband had been alive. Penelope learned that the Valentine brothers had lost their father just the previous spring to a heart condition that had taken him suddenly. The family was still grieving, but they were managing the ranch well together, and there was clearly deep love and respect among them. Yates, she learned, was responsible for the cattle operation, while Yardley managed the horses and the business side of things. Mrs. Valentine oversaw the household and kept the books. Throughout the meal, Penelope was acutely aware of Yates sitting across from her. He spoke less than his brother, but when he did contribute to the conversation, his words were thoughtful and measured. Several times she caught him looking at her, and each time their eyes met, she felt that same flutter in her chest. After supper, Mrs. Valentine and Penelope cleaned up while the brothers went out to check on the animals one last time before bed. When they were alone, Mrs. Valentine spoke quietly. "My son is quite taken with you," she said without preamble. Penelope felt her cheeks heat. "I barely know him," she said. "Sometimes that is how it happens," Mrs. Valentine said. "My husband and I knew each other for only 2 weeks before he proposed. When it is right, you just know. I can see the way you look at Yates too. Do not be ashamed of it." "I am not ashamed," Penelope said softly, "just surprised. I had not thought about romance in so long. There has been so much else to worry about." "There is always something to worry about on the frontier," Mrs. Valentine said wisely. "But that does not mean you should neglect your own happiness. You are young and clearly capable." You deserve a partner who will respect you and stand beside you, not a man who will try to control you or take what is yours." "Yates seems like that kind of man," Penelope ventured. "He is," Mrs. Valentine said firmly. "Both my sons are. Their father and I raised them to value women as equals, to understand that strength comes in many forms. Yates may seem quiet, but he has the biggest heart of anyone I know. He would never hurt you or try to take advantage of you." Before Penelope could respond, the brothers returned, bringing cold air with them. "Everything is secure for the night," Yardley announced. "The temperature is dropping fast. We will likely wake to ice in the water troughs." "Then it is a good thing Penelope is staying here tonight, Mrs. Valentine said. "She would have frozen walking home in this." Mrs. Valentine showed Penelope to the spare room on the second floor. It was a small but comfortable space with a single bed, a washstand, and a chair. Clean linens and a warm quilt made the bed inviting, and someone had placed a pitcher of fresh water and a towel on the washstand. "There is a chamber pot under the bed if you need it during the night," Mrs. Valentine said. "And do not worry about getting up early. Sleep as long as you need. Breakfast will be ready whenever you come down." "Thank you," Penelope said, "for everything. Your hospitality means more to me than I can say." Mrs. Valentine patted her hand. "You are welcome here any time, Penelope, I mean that. Whether it is to escape your cousin's harassment or just for a visit, our door is always open to you." After Mrs. Valentine left, Penelope prepared for bed, washing her face and hands in the cold water and changing into the nightgown that Mrs. Valentine had lent her. The bed was wonderfully soft, much more comfortable than her own thin mattress, and the quilts were warm and heavy. She lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling, and found herself thinking about Yates. She could still feel the gentle way his hands had guided hers when he was showing her how to use the revolver. Could still see the concern in his eyes when he had asked if she would be safe. There was something about him that called to her, something that made her feel protected without feeling diminished. She had spent so long fighting to prove she could manage on her own that she had forgotten how good it felt to have someone on her side. Someone who wanted to help not because they thought her weak, but because they cared about her well-being. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, Penelope's dreams were warm and full of possibility. She woke to pale winter sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from below. For a moment she was disoriented, forgetting where she was, but then memory returned and she smiled. She dressed quickly in her blue calico, wishing she had better clothes, and made her way downstairs. The kitchen was bustling with activity. Mrs. Valentine was at the stove and Yardley was setting the table. Yates stood by the window, looking out at the frost-covered prairie, but he turned when he heard her footsteps. "Good morning," he said, and his smile made her heart skip. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Penelope admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality." Breakfast was another hearty affair with eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy. Penelope ate more than she had intended, the good food and warm company lowering her usual careful guard. After they finished, Yates stood and reached for his coat. "I will hitch up the wagon to take you home," he said. "The roads are rough, but the wagon will be warmer than riding." "I can walk," Penelope protested half-heartedly. "Not in this cold," Yates said firmly. "Besides, I want to check on your house. Make sure your cousin has not tried anything else while you were gone." They made their goodbyes to Mrs. Valentine and Yardley, with Mrs. Valentine promising again to write to Judge Henderson that very day. Then Penelope climbed up onto the wagon seat next to Yates, and they set off toward Fort Kearney. The wagon ride gave them time to talk without the presence of Yates's family. At first, their conversation was practical, discussing Bernard and the legal steps Penelope might take. But as they drew closer to town, the conversation became more personal. "May I ask you something?" Yates said, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. "Of course. Why did you never marry? A woman like you must have had offers." Penelope considered her answer carefully. "I had a few offers when I was younger," she said. "But they all came from men who made it clear they expected me to give up everything and mold myself to their wishes. My father never pushed me to accept anyone. He said I should wait for someone who valued me for who I am, not who they wanted me to be. After he died, I was too busy trying to survive to think about romance." "Your father sounds like he was a remarkable man," Yates said. "He was. I miss him every day." Penelope paused. "May I ask you something in return? Anything? Why have you never married? Surely there are young women in the area who would be interested in a successful rancher." Yates was quiet for a moment. "I have been too focused on building the ranch to think much about marriage," he said. "And I suppose I have been waiting for someone who could understand this life, who would not resent the hard work and the long hours. Someone strong enough to be a true partner." He glanced at her. "Someone like you." Penelope's breath caught. "Yates, we barely know each other." "I know," he said. "But sometimes you just know when something feels right. From the moment I saw you standing on that porch yesterday, locked out and scared but still standing tall and refusing to give up, I knew you were someone special. I would like the chance to know you better, Penelope. Properly, with your permission." "I would like that too," Penelope said softly, feeling warmth spread through her chest despite the cold air. "Very much." They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence, but Yates reached over and took her gloved hand in his, and Penelope did not pull away. When they arrived at her house, everything appeared undisturbed. The padlock and hasp were still sitting on the small table where Penelope had left them, and there were no signs that Bernard had returned. Yates insisted on checking the entire property again, including the shed and cellar, before he would leave. "I will come back day after tomorrow as I planned," he said as he prepared to leave, "to make sure everything is still all right." "I will be fine," Penelope assured him. "But I will be glad to see you again." Yates smiled, and before Penelope quite realized what he intended, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Stay safe, Penelope." She watched him drive away, her hand pressed to the spot where his lips had touched her skin, feeling like the sun had come out despite the gray winter sky. The next 2 days passed quietly. Bernard did not return, and Penelope began to hope that perhaps he had given up and left town entirely. She went about her usual tasks, caring for her chickens, maintaining her house, and trying not to think too much about Yates Valentine. But he was constantly in her thoughts anyway, the memory of his kindness and his strength and that brief, sweet kiss warming her from the inside. True to his word, Yates appeared at her door on the second day, this time on horseback rather than in the wagon. He carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Mother sent you some preserves and fresh bread," he explained as Penelope invited him inside. "She worries you are not eating enough." "Your mother is very kind," Penelope said, touched by the gesture. "Please tell her I am very grateful." "You can tell her yourself when you come to supper on Sunday," Yates said. "She asked me to invite you. She would like you to meet some of the neighboring ranchers and their wives. She thinks it would be good for you to have more friends in the area, people who could vouch for your character if there are ever any legal proceedings involving your cousin." "That is very thoughtful," Penelope said. "I would be happy to come." Yates stayed for an hour, helping her repair a loose board on the chicken coop and chopping wood for her stove. They talked easily, learning more about each other's lives and dreams. Penelope learned that Yates loved the ranch, but sometimes missed having more intellectual stimulation. that he had taught himself to read from his mother's books and had a particular interest in history and philosophy. Yates learned that Penelope had always wanted to travel, to see the mountains and the ocean, things she had only read about in books. "Maybe someday you will," Yates said. "The railroad is expanding every year. It is not impossible to think that ordinary people might be able to travel for pleasure in the future." "That would be wonderful," Penelope said wistfully, "though I doubt I will ever have the means." "You never know what the future might hold," Yates said, and there was something in his tone that made Penelope look at him sharply, but he just smiled and reached for his coat. "I should get back before Mother sends Yardley looking for me. I will see you Sunday." "Yes," Penelope promised. "I will be there." After he left, Penelope found herself humming as she went about her evening chores, something she had not done since before her father died. Hope was a dangerous thing on the frontier, where so many plans went awry and so many dreams died in the harsh reality of survival. But for the first time in years, Penelope allowed herself to hope for more than just survival. She allowed herself to hope for happiness. Sunday arrived cold and clear. Penelope wore her blue calico again, as it was her best dress, and wrapped herself in her brown coat for the walk to the ranch. She arrived to find several wagons and horses already there, and voices drifting from inside the house. Mrs. Valentine greeted her warmly at the door, taking her coat and introducing her to the other guests. There were 3 neighboring ranching families, the Carters, the Millers, and the Thompsons. All were friendly and welcoming, particularly the women, who seemed delighted to have a new potential friend in the area. The afternoon was spent in pleasant conversation and a delicious meal. Penelope found herself relaxing in the warm atmosphere, laughing at stories and sharing some of her own. Several times she caught Yates watching her from across the room, and each time their eyes met, she felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. As the afternoon wore on, and the guests began to prepare to leave, Mrs. Carter pulled Penelope aside. She was a stout, motherly woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "I heard about your trouble with your cousin," she said quietly. "Sarah told me when she invited us today. I want you to know that if you ever need help, our ranch is just 4 miles northeast of your place. My husband and I have 3 grown sons, and they would be happy to help you deal with that scoundrel if he gives you more trouble." "Thank you," Penelope said, genuinely moved. "That means a great deal to me. Women need to stick together out here," Mrs. Carter said. "The frontier is hard enough without having to deal with men who think they can push us around. You have friends now, Penelope. Do not forget that." As the guests departed, Yates approached Penelope. "May I speak with you privately for a moment?" he asked. Penelope nodded, her heart beginning to beat faster. They walked out onto the front porch, where the setting sun painted the prairie in shades of gold and orange despite the cold. "I know we have only known each other a week," Yates said, turning to face her. "But I need you to know that my feelings for you are serious. I am not a man who speaks lightly or acts on impulse. When I told you I wanted to know you better, I meant it. I would like to court you properly, Penelope, with the intention of marriage if you feel the same way I do." Penelope's breath caught in her throat. "Yates, I do feel the same way, but are you certain? We have only just met, and my situation with Bernard is complicated. I would not want to burden you with my problems." "Your problems are not a burden to me," Yates said firmly. He took her hands in his touch warm even through their gloves. "They are something we will solve together. I am not asking you to give up your independence or your property. I am asking to stand beside you, to be your partner in building a life. Together, we can make something stronger than either of us could alone." "You really mean that?" Penelope said, searching his face. "You are not like other men, are you?" "I hope not," Yates said with a small smile. "I want to be the man you deserve, Penelope. The man who sees your strength and values it, who wants to support your dreams, not smother them. Will you give me that chance?" "Yes," Penelope whispered, and then louder, more confidently, "Yes, Yates, I will." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close against the cold. Penelope rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart through his coat, and felt safer and more content than she had in years. They were interrupted by a polite cough from the doorway. Yardley stood there, grinning. "Sorry to intrude on the romantic moment, but it is getting dark and cold. Penelope should probably head home before it gets any colder, and Yates, you should probably be the one to drive her." "You are right," Yates said, though he made no immediate move to release Penelope. "Thank you for your impeccable timing, brother." "Always happy to help," Yardley said cheerfully. "Mother says to invite Penelope to stay again, but I pointed out that might not be proper now that you have declared your intentions." Penelope felt her cheeks heat, but she could not help smiling. "Your brother is right. I should go home, but I cannot thank you all enough for today. It has been wonderful." The drive home in the gathering darkness was quiet but companionable. Yates kept one arm around Penelope's shoulders, sheltering her from the worst of the wind. When they reached her house, he walked her to the door and waited while she lit a lamp inside. "I will come by tomorrow evening," he said, "and every evening this week if you will have me. I know propriety says we should have a long courtship, but I do not want to waste time with meaningless formalities. We are not children, and this is the frontier. People here understand that life is short and uncertain." "I want that too," Penelope said. "I want to spend as much time with you as possible." Yates cupped her face in his hands and leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Penelope did not want to pull away. She closed her eyes as his lips met hers in a gentle, sweet kiss that made her toes curl in her boots. It was her first real kiss, and it was everything she had imagined and more. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I should go," Yates said, though he made no move to leave, "before I forget myself entirely." "Tomorrow evening," Penelope reminded him, her voice soft and full of promise. "Tomorrow," Yates agreed. Penelope watched from her window as he drove away, her fingers pressed to her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. She was in love. She had fallen fast and hard, and she was not the least bit sorry about it. The week that followed was the happiest Penelope could remember. Yates came every evening as promised, sometimes staying for supper, sometimes just sitting with her by the fire and talking for hours. They learned everything about each other, sharing stories from their childhoods, their fears and hopes, their dreams for the future. Yates was a patient and attentive suitor. He brought her small gifts, a length of ribbon in a pretty blue that matched her eyes, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, a warm pair of gloves his mother had knitted. In return, Penelope baked for him, discovering that he had a particular fondness for apple pie and molasses cookies. They stole kisses when they could, brief moments of connection that left them both wanting more. But Yates was always respectful, always mindful of Penelope's reputation and virtue. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, content to let their relationship develop at its own pace. Bernard did not reappear, and as the days passed without incident, Penelope began to hope that he had truly given up and left the area. Then, on Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after Yates had first helped her, the sheriff appeared at her door. Sheriff Tom Morrison was a graying man in his 50s with a weathered face and tired eyes. He had been kind to Penelope when she first complained about Bernard, but limited in what he could do to help her. "Miss Dawson," he said, removing his hat, "I have some news about your cousin Bernard." "Has something happened?" Penelope asked, inviting him inside. "He has been arrested in Kearney Junction," the sheriff said. "Apparently, he tried to sell a horse that did not belong to him, and the rightful owner recognized the animal." When they searched Bernard's room at the boarding house, they found several other stolen items. He is being held there on theft charges. Relief washed over Penelope. "So he will not be coming back here, not any time soon," the sheriff said. "He is looking at prison time if he is convicted, which seems likely given the evidence against him. I wanted you to know so you could stop worrying about him bothering you again." "Thank you, Sheriff," Penelope said. "That is the best news I've had in months." After the sheriff left, Penelope sat down at her small table, feeling like a tremendous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Bernard was gone, truly gone, and she would no longer have to live in fear of him returning to harass her or try to take her property. She was free. When Yates arrived that evening, she met him at the door with the news. His face lit up with genuine joy for her. "That is wonderful," he said, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Now you can truly start to build the life you want without that cloud hanging over you." "I already know what kind of life I want," Penelope said, looking up at him. "A life with you if you still want that." "More than anything," Yates said, and kissed her deeply. That evening, sitting by the fire in Penelope's small house, Yates formally asked her to marry him. He had no ring yet, he admitted sheepishly, as everything had happened so fast. But he promised to get her the best one he could afford as soon as possible. Penelope told him she did not need a ring, that she would marry him with or without one. All she needed was him and the promise of a future together. They set the wedding date for 6 weeks hence, in late December. It would be a small ceremony, just family and close friends, held at the ranch with the circuit preacher performing the service. Mrs. Valentine offered to help Penelope sew a wedding dress, and the neighboring ranchers' wives all chimed in with offers to bring food and help with preparations. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of activity and happiness. Penelope spent much of her time at the Valentine ranch, getting to know her future family better and preparing for her new life. Mrs. Valentine taught her the more intricate details of running a ranch household, and Penelope found she had a knack for organization and planning. Judge Henderson came through Fort Kearney as promised, and on Mrs. Valentine's recommendation, issued an order permanently barring Bernard from Penelope's property and confirming her sole ownership. With that document in hand, Penelope finally felt completely secure in her inheritance. She and Yates discussed what to do with her small house. Penelope was reluctant to give it up entirely, as it represented her independence and her father's legacy. Yates understood and suggested they rent it out to a respectable family in need of housing. The rent money could be Penelope's own, to save or spend as she wished, maintaining her financial independence even within marriage. This gesture touched Penelope deeply. Most men would have insisted she sell the property or simply turn it over to their control. That Yates wanted her to maintain her own means, her own small piece of autonomy, confirmed everything she had come to believe about him. He truly did see her as an equal partner, not as property to be acquired. The wedding day arrived cold but clear, with a light dusting of snow covering the prairie in a blanket of white. Penelope wore a simple but beautiful dress of deep blue wool that Mrs. Valentine and the neighboring wives had helped her sew. It had a fitted bodice and a full skirt, with delicate white lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was pinned up in an elegant style with a few curls framing her face, and she carried a small bouquet of dried flowers and evergreen sprigs. The ceremony took place in the main room of the ranch house, which had been decorated with pine boughs and candles. About 20 people attended, including Yates's family, the neighboring ranchers and their families, Sheriff Morrison and his wife, and a few other friends from Fort Kearney. Penelope's hands trembled slightly as she stood before the preacher, facing Yates. He looked handsome in his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his brown eyes warm and full of love. When it came time to exchange vows, his voice was steady and sure. "I, Yates Valentine, take you, Penelope Dawson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to stand beside you in all things, to honor your strength and support your dreams, to be your partner and your friend in times of plenty and in times of hardship, for as long as we both shall live." Penelope's voice shook with emotion as she spoke her own vows. "I, Penelope Dawson, take you, Yates Valentine, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand beside you in all things, to bring my strength to support your own, to be your partner and your friend in joy and in sorrow, for as long as we both shall live." When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Yates pulled Penelope into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of their guests. Penelope felt tears of happiness streaming down her cheeks as she clung to her new husband, overwhelmed by the love and acceptance surrounding them. The celebration that followed was joyful and boisterous, with excellent food, dancing to the music of a fiddler from town, and heartfelt toasts to the new couple's happiness. Mrs. Valentine pulled Penelope aside at one point, tears in her own eyes. "Thank you for making my son so happy," she said. "I can see how much he loves you, and I can see that you love him just as much. You are the daughter I always wanted, Penelope. Welcome to our family." "Thank you for raising such a wonderful man," Penelope replied, embracing her new mother-in-law. "And thank you for all your kindness to me. I could not have asked for a better family to marry into." As evening fell and the guests began to depart, Yates and Penelope finally found themselves alone in the small private room that had been prepared for them on the second floor. A fire burned warmly in the small fireplace, and the bed had been made up with fresh linens and warm quilts. Penelope felt suddenly shy, nervous about what was to come. She had only the vaguest understanding of what happened between a husband and wife, gleaned from whispered conversations with married women and her own limited imagination. Yates seemed to sense her nervousness. He took her hands in his touch gentle and reassuring. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said softly. "We have the rest of our lives together. There is no rush." "I want to be with you," Penelope said, her voice trembling slightly. "I am just a little frightened. I do not really know what to expect." "Neither do I, to be honest," Yates admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "I have spent my whole adult life working the ranch with little time for romantic pursuits. We will figure this out together, all right, and we will take it slow." He kissed her then, gently at first, then with growing passion as Penelope relaxed into his arms. They undressed each other slowly, with trembling hands and whispered words of love and reassurance. When they finally came together, it was with tenderness and care, Yates always mindful of Penelope's comfort, Penelope giving herself to him completely, holding nothing back. Afterward, lying wrapped in each other's arms beneath the warm quilts, Penelope felt a profound sense of peace and rightness. This was where she belonged with this man, building a life together based on mutual respect and love. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Yates replied, pulling her closer. "More than I ever thought possible. Thank you for trusting me, Penelope." "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for seeing me," Penelope said, "for seeing who I really am and valuing that instead of trying to change me into something else." They fell asleep in each other's arms, warm and content despite the winter cold outside. The first months of their marriage were an adjustment, but a happy one. Penelope moved into the Valentine ranch house, bringing her few precious possessions with her. Mrs. Valentine was delighted to have another woman in the house, and insisted on treating Penelope as a daughter rather than simply a daughter-in-law. Penelope found that she enjoyed ranch life far more than she had expected. She took over much of the household management, working alongside Mrs. Valentine to keep the large house running smoothly. She learned to make cheese and butter, to preserve fruits and vegetables for the winter months, to manage the small kitchen garden that would provide fresh produce in the warmer months. But she also insisted on learning about the ranch operation itself. Yates taught her to ride properly, not just the basic skills her father had taught her, but how to handle a horse with confidence and skill. She learned about cattle management, about the seasonal rhythms of ranch life, about breeding and birthing and the 100 other tasks that went into running a successful operation. Yates never treated her interest as a novelty or a phase. He answered all her questions seriously, taught her everything she wanted to know, and began consulting her on ranch decisions. Penelope discovered she had a good head for business and a practical approach to problem-solving that complemented Yates's more cautious, methodical style. Yardley, for his part, seemed genuinely delighted to have Penelope as a sister-in-law. He teased her mercilessly, as he did everyone he cared about, but there was real affection in his jokes, and he never crossed the line into disrespect. Penelope's small house in Fort Kearney was rented to a young family, the Mitchells, who had recently arrived in the area. They were hardworking and honest, and the rent they paid gave Penelope a small but steady income of her own. She used some of this money to buy books, building a small library at the ranch, and saved the rest for future needs. As winter gave way to spring, Penelope realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a mixture of joy and fear. She had seen too many women die in childbirth on the frontier, too many babies who did not survive their first year. But when she told Yates, his face lit up with such pure happiness that her fears eased somewhat. "We are going to be parents," he said wonderingly, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A child, our child." Mrs. Valentine was equally overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. She immediately began preparing for the baby's arrival, setting aside one of the smaller rooms on the second floor to be converted into a nursery. The neighboring ranchers' wives rallied around Penelope, sharing advice and practical items they no longer needed. Penelope's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and into the summer. As her belly grew, Yates became increasingly protective, insisting she rest more and take on fewer physical tasks. Penelope chafed at these restrictions at first, but as the pregnancy advanced and she grew more tired and uncomfortable, she was grateful for his concern. In late August, as the prairie grasses turned gold and the harvest season began, Penelope went into labor. It was a long and difficult labor, lasting through the night and into the next day. Mrs. Carter attended her, along with Mrs. Valentine and the local midwife, an experienced woman named Mrs. Thompson, who had delivered most of the babies in the area for the past 20 years. Yates paced outside the bedroom door, driven nearly mad with worry by Penelope's cries of pain. Yardley stayed with him, trying to keep him calm, but Yates could not shake the fear that something would go wrong, that he would lose Penelope just when he had found her. Finally, in the early afternoon of the second day, a baby's cry pierced the air. The bedroom door opened and Mrs. Valentine appeared, her face beaming with joy and tears streaming down her cheeks. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy, strong son, and Penelope is tired but well. She is asking for you." Yates rushed into the room. Penelope lay propped up on pillows, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale with exhaustion, but she was smiling, In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was the tiniest human being Yates had ever seen. His son. Their son. "Come meet him," Penelope said softly. Yates approached the bed reverently, sitting carefully on the edge. Penelope moved the blanket aside so he could see the baby's face. The infant had a shock of dark hair like his father and was fast asleep, his tiny fist curled against his cheek. "He is perfect," Yates whispered, reaching out to gently touch the soft skin of his son's cheek. "You are amazing, Penelope. Look what you did. Look what we made together." "What should we name him?" Penelope asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Yates knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," he said. "After your father, Thomas Valentine, so a piece of your father lives on." Penelope's eyes filled with tears. "That is perfect," she said. "Thomas James Valentine." Over the next weeks, Penelope recovered her strength while Yates learned the peculiar terror of being responsible for such a tiny, fragile life. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, with a lusty cry that announced his needs clearly. Yates found himself completely besotted with his son, spending hours just watching him sleep or holding him while Penelope rested. As autumn arrived and Thomas grew stronger, life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Penelope discovered that motherhood, while exhausting, came naturally to her. She nursed Thomas herself, refusing to consider hiring a wet nurse as some of the wealthier ranch families did. This was her son, and she would care for him herself. Yates proved to be an involved and loving father, changing diapers and walking the floor with a fussy baby without complaint. He sang to Thomas in his deep voice, silly songs he made up that made Penelope laugh, and told him stories about the ranch and the wild prairie beyond. The seasons turned, and Thomas grew from an infant into a bright, curious toddler. He had his father's brown eyes and his mother's blonde hair, and a smile that could light up a room. Penelope and Yates marveled at every milestone. His first word, his first step, his first attempt to climb into the corral to pet the horses. 2 years after Thomas was born, Penelope gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Clara. Clara had her mother's blue eyes and a temperament that was equal parts sweet and stubborn. Where Thomas was cautious and thoughtful like Yates, Clara was bold and adventurous, always getting into mischief and keeping her parents on their toes. Mrs. Valentine, now an active and involved grandmother, doted on both children. Yardley proved to be an entertaining uncle, teaching the children silly games and taking them on gentle horseback rides around the ranch. As the years passed, the Valentine ranch prospered. Yates and Penelope worked as true partners, their different strengths complementing each other. Penelope's business acumen helped them expand their operations wisely, while Yates's steady leadership and deep knowledge of ranching kept the day-to-day operations running smoothly. Penelope never forgot where she had come from or how close she had come to losing everything. She became known throughout the county as a woman who helped other women in difficult situations, offering practical advice, legal assistance, and sometimes financial help to those who needed it. She established a small fund, using part of the ranch's profits and the rent from her house in Fort Kearney, to help women who were widowed or abandoned to keep their property and establish their independence. Yates supported these efforts wholeheartedly, proud of his wife's compassion and determination to make a difference. Together, they became pillars of the community, respected and admired by their neighbors. The years brought both joy and sorrow. Mrs. Valentine passed peacefully in her sleep when Thomas was 10 and Clara was 8, leaving behind a legacy of love and strength. Yates and Penelope grieved her loss deeply, but they honored her memory by raising their children with the same values she had instilled in her own sons. Yardley eventually married as well, bringing home a spirited woman named Rachel who fit perfectly into the Valentine family. Their wedding was a joyous occasion, held at the ranch just as Yates and Penelope's had been, and in time, Yardley and Rachel had children of their own, cousins who grew up alongside Thomas and Clara as close as siblings. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. As Thomas and Clara grew older, they both took active roles in the operation. Thomas, serious and thoughtful, showed a natural aptitude for managing the cattle operation, while Clara surprised everyone with her skill at horse training, working with even the most difficult animals with patience and intuition. Penelope and Yates grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They never took each other for granted, always making time to sit together in the evening and talk, to steal kisses in the barn, to remind each other why they had fallen in love in the first place. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Penelope with a trip to Denver, fulfilling her long-ago dream of seeing the mountains. They traveled by railroad, a journey that would have been impossible when they first met, but which had become commonplace as the century drew toward its close. Standing together at the base of the Rocky Mountains, Penelope leaned against her husband and reflected on the improbable chain of events that had brought them to this moment. If Bernard had not locked her out that cold November day, if Yates had not happened to ride past at exactly the right time, if he had not stopped to help, their lives would have been completely different. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "About locks and keys," Penelope said. "About how you broke that lock and gave me back access to my home. But really, you gave me so much more than that. You gave me a partner, a family, a future I never could have imagined." "You gave me all of those things too," Yates said. "Before I met you, I was just existing, going through the motions of life. You made me want to truly live. You showed me what it means to love someone completely, to build something meaningful together." "We have had a good life, have we not?" Penelope said. "The best," Yates agreed. "And we still have many more years ahead of us, God willing, many more adventures to share." They stood there together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of pink and gold. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life together based on mutual respect, trust, and love. When they returned to the ranch, they found it bustling with activity. Thomas had been managing things in their absence and had everything running smoothly. He was 20 now, a young man who reminded Penelope more of Yates every day, and he was courting a young woman from a neighboring ranch whom Penelope liked very much. Clara, at 18, was proving to be one of the best horse trainers in the region, with people coming from miles around to have her work with their difficult animals. She had her mother's independent spirit and her father's patience, a combination that served her well. Yates and Penelope settled back into ranch life, but with a new appreciation for how far they had come and how much they had built together. They continued to work side by side, partners in every sense of the word, managing the ranch and raising their children and enjoying the life they had created. As more years passed, they became grandparents, first when Thomas married his sweetheart and had 3 children, then when Clara, after much insistence that she would never marry, surprised everyone by falling in love with a veterinarian who had come to the area and starting a family of her own. The ranch house, which had once seemed so large, filled with the sound of grandchildren playing and laughing. Yates built an addition to accommodate everyone, and Sunday dinners became a cherished tradition with 3 generations gathered around the long table. Penelope sometimes walked through the rooms of the house, and marveled at how full her life had become. She thought of that terrified young woman standing on a cold porch, locked out and alone, and hardly recognized herself. That woman had been strong, certainly, strong enough to survive and persevere. But she had also been lonely and afraid, carrying all her burdens alone. Now, she was surrounded by love and family. She had a partner who valued her opinions and supported her dreams. She had children and grandchildren who loved her. She had a community that respected her. She had a home that was truly hers, not just in legal terms but in every sense that mattered. On a cool autumn evening, when Penelope was 65 and Yates was 67, they sat together on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the prairie they both loved. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, supervised by Thomas and Clara, while Yardley and his family were expected for supper. "You remember the day we met?" Penelope asked, taking Yates's weathered hand in her own. "Every detail," Yates said. "You were standing there in that thin shawl, trying so hard to be brave, but I could see how frightened you were. I knew I had to help you." "I am so grateful you did," Penelope said. "You changed my entire life that day." "We changed each other's lives," Yates corrected. "I was just going through the motions before I met you. You gave me purpose and joy and love. You made me a better man." "We made each other better," Penelope said. "That is what true partnership does." "We lifted each other up, supported each other through hard times, celebrated the good times together. We built all of this together." She gestured to the ranch spread out before them, to the family playing in the yard, to the home they had created together over 40 years of marriage. "I would not change a single thing," Yates said. "Well, except maybe I would have ridden past your house a few months earlier, saved you some of the trouble with Bernard," Penelope laughed. "Everything happened exactly as it was meant to. The struggles made me appreciate the joy even more. And that day, when you broke that lock and handed me the key, you were not just giving me access to my house. You were opening the door to our future together. The best decision I ever made was to stop and help you," Yates said. "The best decision I ever made was to trust you," Penelope replied. They sat in companionable silence as the last rays of sunlight faded and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Around them, their family laughed and played, the sound of their voices carrying on the evening breeze. Inside the house, lights glowed warm and welcoming, promising good food and better company. Penelope leaned her head on Yates's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her automatically, a gesture so familiar after 40 years that neither of them had to think about it. She thought about locks and keys, about doors that close and doors that open, about how one act of kindness from a stranger could change the entire course of a life. She had been locked out, cold and afraid and alone, facing a future that seemed impossibly difficult. But Yates had broken that lock and given her the key, not just to her house but to a life full of love and purpose and belonging. Together, they had built something lasting and true, a partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. As the evening star appeared in the western sky, bright and steady, Penelope closed her eyes and sent a silent prayer of thanks heavenward, to whatever power had guided Yates past her house on that cold November day so many years ago. She had been given a gift beyond measure, and she had never taken it for granted, not for a single day. "I love you," she whispered to the man beside her. "I love you too," Yates replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Always have, always will." And there, on the porch of the home they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created and the land they had worked, Yates and Penelope Valentine sat in perfect contentment, knowing that theirs was a love story for the ages, born from a simple act of kindness, and nurtured into something beautiful and enduring through decades of partnership, respect, and devotion. The stars emerged one by one in the vast Nebraska sky, witnessing the quiet happiness of two people who had found each other against all odds and built a legacy that would endure for generations. The lock had been broken, the key had been given, and the door to their shared future had opened wide, leading them both home.